Against a guy like me that's in and out and light on his feet and the angles are different. It's the old age, this is the new age. I wanted to come over here to America and show the American public the new era of the fighting Irish, and I brought my whole country with me. If one of us go to war, we all go to war.
I said it last year, we're not here just to take part, we're here to take over.
That was a dogfight. You had to dig deep. Give us your thoughts.
Surprise, surprise, motherfucker! The king is back! When I swing that left hook, the human skull cannot take it.
Conor Anthony McGregor is without a doubt the most polarizing, controversial, and one of the most influential figures to ever exist in the world of mixed martial arts, with the only others to reach such stardom in relation to the art itself being the likes of John Jones, Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, the now ever so popular Khabib Nurmagomedov, and even the legend himself who arguably popularized mixed martial arts into what it ended up being today, Bruce Lee. Conor McGregor to many right now is a very disliked individual, a person who went from being known as a guy that would fight anyone, anytime, anywhere, any weight division, with or without injuries. He's a man they once referred to as Mystic Mac because he was so obsessed with the fight game, had so much confidence in himself, and was so goddamn good during his run through the 145-pound featherweight division that he was able to not only predict the outcome of his fights, but he would pick the round, deconstruct his opponents, and explain how the fight would actually end to an almost psychic prediction. During his run through the 145-pound featherweight division, I watched every single one of his fights, every single interview, every single good deed he did, and I even listened to this man's walkout music when I would work out in the mornings. I read up on his diet, his training regime, what he did before becoming a professional fighter, and even the good things he did in his spare time, which the public barely knew about. These were things like randomly donating money to a child who desperately needed it on GoFundMe after he got sepsis the year before and developed cerebral palsy, almost coming to tears in an interview when he was talking about a fan who actually died of leukemia before he could fly him out to Vegas to watch one of his fights, or the other plan was that he would take the belt to his hospital bed. He couldn't actually make this happen because, as I said, the fan did pass away, and many things like helping the local Irish get houses to live in after they had been sleeping in hotels and motels without any assistance from the government. He had such a magnetic aura about him in the way that he spoke and carried himself that he had people like myself who the only Irish heritage that I have or I know about is probably like a great-great-great-great-great-grandfather who was most likely sent to Australia for stealing a loaf of bread in the 1700s. He made people who weren't even Irish, genetically speaking, feel like they were part of the war which he so proudly spoke of. He even had the world believing that he stood a chance in a boxing ring after having no prior boxing experience other than the training that he does in the gym in preparation for UFC fights, which isn't the same sort of training as boxers do, and when he was younger at the Crumlin Boxing Club. He had all of us believe that against one of, if not the greatest to ever do it, that he could be the first to defeat Floyd Mayweather. Through his rise in the UFC, he was always incredibly abrasive, cocky, and very blunt with his approach. A lot of people would consider it trash talk, but in the words of him,
people are always saying about the talk, and I talk, and I talk, and I talk, but guess fucking what? I back it up! I back it up!
Time after time after time after time. But as fights went on and his popularity transcended the sport of mixed martial arts and even the UFC itself, even as a very loyal fan to this man, I started to notice it was getting to his head. Now, I wasn't saying this sort of stuff from the start like a lot of just full-blown legitimate haters were. There was just something I could genuinely see changing in this man's character. It wasn't just an act for promotion of his brand. Conor McGregor was slowly becoming a different man. During the lead up to the Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor 2 fight, Conor was inspirational. He took his first loss on the chin very well. He commended Nate a lot in post-fight interviews and didn't bitch and moan or make every excuse under the sun like most fighters do when they lose their fights. The only thing Conor McGregor asked for was for the UFC to relax with his media obligations so he could take the Nate Diaz 2 fight as serious as possible. Not only did Conor move up 2 weight classes to fight Nate in their first bout, something he actually did for Nate when they were discussing contracts and making the fight happen in the first place on short notice, after Rafael dos Anjos injured his foot in training and had to pull out from their originally planned lightweight title fight, and the weight was decided on because Nate didn't want to cut weight for the fight. But Conor refused to have any sort of advantage with the rematch and still wanted it at the same weight class, which was 170, welterweight. This is a weight class which, even when Conor is at his peak performance in terms of fitness, he could barely get his own body to that weight naturally. The same weight he lost at was where he wanted the rematch to take place. Conor was so committed to the idea of taking this fight as serious as possible that he was willing to retire if things didn't go his way in the lead up of the fight. This bout was serious. Everything leading up to the inevitable rematch was the most inspiring sporting experience I've ever witnessed throughout my life. This man was fighting to redeem his first loss in the UFC, didn't want anything changed or any kind of advantage, something which I'm sure the UFC would have happily done and they had already talked about doing so, and he was actually taking Nate Diaz seriously this time, rather than viewing him as just a fill-in fighter. It ended up being a 5-round war, which I frankly will never forget watching in a sporting bar where one half of the bar was yelling for Diaz and the other half was yelling for Conor. At the end, Conor was victorious, and it was one of the greatest events in UFC history. This, to me, was where the old Conor stopped being Conor. Leading up to the Eddie Alvarez bout, which was set to take place for the first time in New York City, Madison Square Garden, since the ban of MMA was finally lifted after it was revealed there was some shady political dealings going on, which actually hindered the UFC from being able to have events there, Conor and Eddie were set to fight for the 155-pound lightweight belt. Conor had since defeated Nate Diaz in their second fight and was ready to gain a second title to go next to his 145-pound featherweight title. The actual lead up to this fight had its good moments, like the iconic one-liner against Jeremy Stevens.
Who the is that guy? Who the is that? You know damn well who I am. Who the is that?
And many other highlights from the press conferences, like the offhand comment about getting Floyd out of bed, which would later lead to their future bout in boxing. But it was the second press conference where Conor came across as an absolute tool. He comes up with this Gucci mink coat, almost throws a chair at Eddie, and is basically acting like a buffoon the whole time. What's funny about this press conference is the first glimpse at Conor's shady side life, where Eddie hints he is cheating on his girlfriend, Dee Devlin, and has gotten another girl pregnant. Something which would later become big news.
Great, and Eddie, what do you think that announcement's gonna be?
Conor's having 2 kids and his girlfriend is not having twins, so you guys do the math.
The fame was slowly getting to his head, and this would only get worse as time went on. Conor went out there, absolutely destroyed Eddie Alvarez in such a fashion that it made it look like Eddie wasn't even in the same league as Conor, nor should Eddie have even been in the same octagon as Conor. The post-fight interview, however, was completely different than his previous ones. Just like how his manner of speech and character was extremely cocky at the press conference prior. A lot of people would write that off as just normal Conor McGregor cockiness and confidence, but it just felt different. I remember having this conversation with my grandmother who knew nothing about the UFC, and she had seen a preview to the Conor fight on TV. The first thing she asked me was, is he Irish? As she didn't get to hear him speak, but I had talked about him in the past, and she had seen his antics in the preview for the Eddie fight on TV, which was from the press conference, to which I answered yes. Her being someone from an Irish lineage said, the money will get to his head, just you watch. And this wasn't just something I'd heard her say. Many others from the start said the same thing, and a lot of my Irish friends also said the exact same thing too. They'd been warning me for ages that his reception in Ireland wasn't what it once was, and the man who was once referred to as the pride of Ireland was now being the embarrassment of the nation. This all became absolutely true when I was watching the Floyd Mayweather vs Conor McGregor circus tour. Once again, it did have its good moments, but it was also absolutely cringe during a lot of the spectacle.
Do they not know I'm half black? Yeah! I'm half black from the belly button down.
What?
Conor just didn't seem like Conor anymore. He did seem to be taking the fight as serious as possible, and I wasn't doubting that aspect of the money fight at all. But the tour was just honestly really uncomfortable to watch sometimes. There's a big difference between his cocky self-confidence that was magnetic to us viewers during 2014 to 2016, but the weird dressing like a millionaire, singing on stage, making jokes that made my skin crawl from how bad they were, and all the other over-the-top garbage he was doing. Once again, it just wasn't the same Conor. After his loss to Floyd in the 10th round via TKO, things went downhill and fast. Not only did he win the equivalent of the lottery by just fighting Floyd, but he was now more focused on his whiskey than he was on anything else. The only thing I'd say in defense of that is, well, this was to be expected to some degree. The goal for Conor was always to get in, get rich, and get out. CTE and general brain damage from combat sports aren't imaginary, nor is the risk of actually dying in the ring or octagon. The fight game is a young man's sport. You aren't guaranteed to succeed, nor are you guaranteed a long career, and the machine will chew you up and spit you out when it's done with you. Though the issue here is that Conor was still staying in the spotlight and continued to chime in on UFC bouts. He would talk all the time on Twitter, not sign any contracts, and was more focused on his whiskey than anything else. Once again, I understand the whiskey business was something he'd always wanted to pursue alongside or after MMA, but this was different, and it wasn't until Khabib Nurmagomedov called out Artem Lobov for trash talking him and slapped him in person that Conor actually decided to return to the UFC. Though the way he did it was absolutely disgusting, completely out of character, and a stain on the sport's reputation. A sport which only in the past 10 or so years has been regarded and respected as a full-blown sport, rather than the blood sport barbarian spectacle that it used to be viewed as. The fact that Conor isn't in jail right now for what could be considered a borderline terrorist attack is pretty damn insane. Some attribute this to just promotion for the UFC, who at first acted like this was unholy and they gasped at what he did. You know, they were that was so horrible, but then later on they used it to promote Khabib versus Conor in their embedded episodes and anywhere else they could. But what Conor did resulted in Ray Borg having an eye injury, Michael Chiesa having to be medically declared unfit to fight from the cut he received after the dolly smashed the bus window, and Rose Namajunas being traumatized from the attack. Conor did all of this in hopes of actually getting Khabib and most likely killing him, and in his very own words, would have resulted in one being in a coffin and one in a cell. McGregor had done many more things before this that could have been considered just as bad, if not in the same ballpark. But this, what Conor did, was embarrassing for the sport of mixed martial arts. The press conference was another glimpse into the window of madness which was about to unfold, and more of a sign that Conor was indeed changing from the man who inspired us through his adversity against Chad Mendes, where Conor had recently suffered a knee injury, which was actually referred to as basically having, quote, no ACL, also known as one of the most important parts of the knee. Now, most would never get into an octagon with such an injury, yet Conor did, and strived through that dogfight to knock out Chad Mendes, the same guy who would later be popped for steroids. And although people love to say, if Chad had a full camp, he would have won. Well, I say, if Conor actually had an ACL, he would have beaten him from pillar to post 7 days a week. Or how about the insane 13-second knockout of the 10-year undefeated Jose Aldo, which absolutely no one seen coming. A man many considered king was now becoming an alcoholic mess who spoke like a belligerent fool, and now is the one asking for opportunities instead of the usual. When you fight Conor, you're winning the lottery, and it's basically red panty night with him. You can chalk up this hatred and rude attitude towards Khabib as him just defending Artem Lobov, and he felt like Khabib had crossed the line. I think most, if not all of us, would do something similar for our friends if they were insulted and slapped the same way that Artem actually was. And Artem, being someone who was with Conor by his side during the most vital moments of his career and would always be there to help him prepare for battle, you can understand that hatred towards Khabib a lot. I really do understand it, right? But half the crap Conor was saying was so over the top and weird that it seemed like he just polished off a full bottle of Proper 12 and then snorted a line of coke before walking out to the press conference. In the words of Dana White, the head of the UFC, it was the darkest press conference I've ever been a part of. He was not only crossing the line with disrespect when talking about Khabib's father, but was a complete piece of crap with his general attitude. There was a moment where he offered Khabib some of his whiskey, which some actually believe he did because he knows it would offend Khabib, as he is a devout Muslim who does not drink alcohol, though part of me feels like Conor was unironically offering him some in a celebratory way because of how excited he was that his whiskey business was coming to fruition, and further shows that he was under the influence at that conference. The same way fighters are able to hug each other after a war of a fight felt to me like this was the same level of small courtesy. For Conor to be blatantly anti-Muslim in this day of age would be beyond retarded. With all of his crap, I don't believe he is that dumb. When you compare the first and second press conference and the way he is carrying himself, it's much different, which further backs what I said before, where it feels like Conor was either under the influence or he was in some weird foul-ass mood because he was acting very off his usual self. Speaking of the second press conference with Khabib, he was so late to it that Khabib actually left as he refused to work on Conor's time, something which I completely agree with Khabib on. Sure, the first few times Conor did this throughout his career during press conferences was kinda cool because it was badass to see that he doesn't follow the UFC's timetable, but they follow his. This is also cool when you consider how much media obligation the fighters actually have, which gets in the way of their ability to train and is especially annoying when they're cutting weight days before a fight. However, after the 50th time of doing so, the novelty wears off and it becomes not only unprofessional on Conor's part, but annoying. Die-hard fans go to these press conferences, and for them to miss out on more entertainment between the two because he is too lazy to arrive at a press conference on time, it's very disrespectful to the fans. The UFC thought the situation was so unpredictable that the first press conference was only for the press and police were everywhere. This wasn't like the Floyd Mayweather tour, the Jose Aldo tour, or any of the ones prior. This was serious. When Conor McGregor walked out against Khabib Nurmagomedov, something seemed off. His beard was uneven, his hair looked unfixed, his demeanor seemed off, he was way too loose and relaxed as if he was on something, and when he entered the octagon, everything just felt different. There was no sporadic, super excited movement that was like a Coke bottle ready to explode, no confident aura that felt like this octagon was his home, and there was more focus on the Proper 12 on the canvas than I believe anything else. It took Conor McGregor 3 rounds to actually start fighting how he usually does, and after he did so, he became the first man to actually win a round against Khabib in the UFC. But by the time he actually did this, he was not only completely gassed after being smashed by Khabib, but it was too little, too late. Something about this fight was off, and I noticed this straight away when watching it live. There was no wide karate stance where he is light on his feet, bouncing back and forth, waiting to counter, no flashy kicks to keep Khabib at bay, none of his signature moves at all. Conor was flat-footed, sloppy on his feet, and was walking with his chin down towards Khabib at the start of every round. He had zero respect for Khabib's ability, was pinching him in the fight, grabbing the fence, and was looking more so to blindly kill him than to masterfully beat him like he had done so to many other opponents in the past. The only credit I give to this apparent, quote, broken foot Conor, something which I barely believe, is that he was decently able to deal with Khabib in the first round and avoided all damage in the first round. He was able to outbox Khabib in some moments while gassed and beaten up, and although Khabib fans love that overhand right, Conor took it on the chin and instantly recovered, then kneed Khabib against the fence. But then when you compare those little highlights of Conor to what Khabib did in the fight, it's really nothing. Conor was eventually smashed, caught in a neck crank, and tapped. That was all she wrote, it's only business. Ever since this loss, the drama, the chaos, and everything else that followed, like Conor grabbing a man's phone, stomping on it, getting into fights with mafia guys and bars, hitting an old man for not wanting to drink his whiskey, rumors about his affairs, alleged sexual assaults, going to house parties and leaving at the crack of dawn during benders, and everything else in between. Conor McGregor went from someone who inspired me during the darkest, most depressing times in my life, showed lower class Irish, English, Australian, New Zealanders, Americans, anyone else from these kind of countries that you don't have to be stuck in a dead-end plumbing job, slaving away for $30,000 a year, doing something you dread, and kissing the ass of a boss. He showed that there was more to life than this mundane pathway that most take and don't ever venture beyond the boundaries. He became the first ever Irishman to win a UFC title, popularized the sport in that region of the world way beyond what it ever was. He is the reason most UFC fighters now make a livable wage on average and not the peanuts they once did. He took the UFC to a completely different level of popularity, had an absolutely insane career filled with the most motivational and inspiring moments in the history of the sport, and even got me to buy his piss-tasting whiskey and this canvas right here, which is my favorite moment in sport, period. I don't believe that anyone should be confined to a rose-tinted glasses time period of their lives that people view them through. Oh, I love this version of you here in 2015 and 16, please stay this way forever. But when people say they miss the old Conor McGregor, they genuinely do miss that man who changed so many lives, and I'm sure is the guy inspiring some young lad to become the next UFC champion as we speak. I don't even mind if Conor McGregor never fights again. I just hope he doesn't continue to tarnish his legacy that could have ended in such a positive, respected, and honorable way as a mixed martial artist. If by chance, Conor, you see this video, I hope it inspires you or at least opens your eyes to the kind of people who actually ignored the haters at the very start and have stuck by you even to this day after all the bullshit. These new age casual Khabib bandwagoners are very cancerous to MMA with their spamming of Khabib time, 28-0, everywhere they post it's just absolute crap. Half the time they don't know what they're talking about. They were incredibly disrespectful to Dustin Poirier when he was making very heartfelt posts about his career, and the most defining moment of his career was his fight with Khabib, yet the comments were just filled with absolute garbage right before the fight happened. Now, these fans might be annoying as hell because you got to admit, when you see what they write, these people don't know what they're talking about when it comes to the sport at all whatsoever, but at least their champion hasn't fallen from grace like you have, Conor. Khabib at this point in time represents everything it means to be a mixed martial artist. The most important thing to him is his family. He respects the sport. He isn't ever disrespectful to his opponents or their families. He defends his title, and what he did during his post-fight interview after defeating Dustin Poirier was absolutely commendable. I still believe Conor McGregor is one of the greatest UFC fighters to ever bless the octagon, and I feel he still has a lot more to offer in the future, though the chances of us seeing him back in his glory days again are very slim if he continues down this road. I know for a fact that there is more to this man who has never been popped for steroids, doesn't miss weight, shows up when he signs the bottom line. I know there's more to him than just negative headlines, Proper 12, and making tweets. Once again, Conor, if you magically see this video, I hope you don't take this the wrong way at all whatsoever. I'm not saying this to shit on you as an individual or spread negativity or lie or anything like that. I'm saying this from the place, from the heart of someone who is a genuine fan of you, and you inspired me through, honestly, some of the worst times in my life. When everything was down, crap, and I felt like my life was just an absolute mess. I could always look forward to listening to your interviews, watching your press conferences, watching you prepare for a fight, and I was inspired, man. I really was. Like True Geordie said in his video, we were all told from the start that you were actually a lot like this from the very start, but like he said too, after watching all of your interviews, reading about you, seeing the backstory before you became an MMA fighter, I just don't believe deep down that you are a bad dude. I just hope we see the old Conor back because, you know, I grew up with combat sports as a kid, but if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have gotten back into it, and whether it's boxing, MMA, just watching the UFC in general, you're the reason that I got back into combat sports. You're one of the biggest motivations that I've ever looked up to in my life. I'm genuinely glad, and I hope one day I can tell my future kids, if I ever have kids, that I got to grow up and watch you go from basically just a nothing everyday Irishman to being champion of the world in 145 and 155. I got to watch every single one of those fights live. You were the UFC equivalent to a lot of people of a Mike Tyson or an Ali. That was what you were. You popularized the sport beyond what it ever was. Inspired so many people, had this insane aura when that walkout music would play, followed by Biggie Smalls. There was just honestly nothing really like it. You were such a polarizing and motivational person that you could draw so much hype that it even overshadowed Floyd Money Mayweather. Imagine being a random mixed martial artist who'd only exploded in the past 3 years, and you are more popular than the guy who has run boxing for the past 10 plus years. I hope one day we get to see the old Conor back, and once again, if you're listening to the video, mate, I hope to see you back.
My name is Conor McGregor and I live in Lucan.
And what's your status or what's your professionalism?
I'm a professional MMA fighter with a record of 4-1. I'm an up-and-coming fighter, and without a doubt you will see me on the UFC in the near future, without a doubt.